The Indianapolis Colts offseason has begun, and we've heard from the key figures involved as they've tried to explain what went wrong this past season, but some are more willing to shoulder the blame than others. We'll dive into it all today in this episode of Locked On Colts. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, then you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. I'm Zach Hicks, and I'm joined by Derek Schultz of Curie and Schultz. How do I say his name?
It's tough, right? There aren't a lot of last names to say. Start with Q. Query and Schultz. All you guys who listen to us, and I know you're a fan of Query and Schultz, so you're probably going to kill me in the comments, but Jake Arthur, my normal co-host, he's going to be back tomorrow, so it's just me and Derek. And Derek, we had a lot of press conference the last couple of days, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think you or I are either of those kind of guys who are going to sit in those press conferences and ask all those questions like all the beat reporters will, right? No, I just, the way that I always treated press conferences, and I know, Zach, you don't like crowds and all that. I'm cool with crowds. Like I'm cool being around other humans, but I'm kind of like the fly in when stuff is important guy. So I always tried to let the people that are there in the trenches every day ask the questions. I don't want to step on any toes. You know what I mean? Like I'm not there to like make my voice heard or anything like that. So I've always been really kind of standoffish when it comes to those pressers.
Yep. So the Colts had a bunch of press conferences and they had those mosh pits going with all the beat reporters throwing as many questions as possible at head coach Jeff Saturday. General manager Chris Ballard was today. Chris Ballard actually spoke for 40 minutes. Today, you guys are listening to this on Wednesday, so Tuesday he spoke, and he answered around 35 questions in those 40 minutes. We're going to talk a lot about those press conferences here, and then we're going to talk about some head coach candidates that the Colts reached out. But first, let's talk about Chris Ballard, Eric. Chris Ballard is a guy where we've kind of soured on him quite a bit this season, and I think that's rightfully so. I mean, it's his 6th, 7th year here with the Colts. And this team has gone from, they've been in the playoffs a couple times, but this year how many GMs can come back after a season where you drop to a 4-win team in your 6th year, in your 7th year, whatever it is? It's really kind of inexcusable that this season happened. But honestly, Chris Ballard kind of stepped up and said all the right things. Like, I'm not saying I'm not upset with him anymore, or I'm back on the Chris Ballard train, but like, you know what? He took the fall for it all.
Yeah, this is Ballard in his element, right? When he gets in front of the camera and it's got that kind of endearing Southern drawl, Texas type vibe going on, like you want to like Chris Ballard, right? He's an easy guy to want to like. I'm torn, man, because I'm kind of like you. I am a process over results guy, but I also understand that the league, eventually you have to produce the results. So the process can be good, but if the process doesn't actually produce anything tangible, then you have to eventually move on from that person. I was just kind of worried that things were so broken over on West 56th Street that they just needed a clean break. But if we're operating under the assumption that Ballard is going to continue, which I think for all intents and purposes, that's the way that it looks like, maybe he can kind of reclaim that footing and get back on that trajectory that we saw in 1920, where the arrow was pointing up for the Colts. Now, unfortunately, it's pointing directly down.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that we saw from Chris Ballard, which we'll come back to this when we talk about a certain other person's press conference, is Chris Ballard stepped up, and the first things he said, he sat down, he said, "I failed." I failed you guys. I failed what you guys expected from me. I failed this team. I failed everything. To go, I need to step forward from here. Dark era, we get step forward, coach speak and all that kind of stuff. But no, the first thing he did is he sat down and he took accountability for it. He didn't start blaming outside factors. He didn't blame specific players. He mostly held off on blaming the former head coach. Chris Ballard sat down and he took all the bullets that he could and he opened himself up to it. The beginning of that press conference, which honestly was a breath of fresh air to me from what we've seen from other people in leadership positions with the Colts lately. It's just that accountability was great to see.
Yeah, and I think it further hammered home for me that he was safe, at least for now, because I don't think you fall on the sword as much as he did unless you feel like your spot is okay. Jeff Saturday, who I know that we're going to talk about, wasn't accountable for anything at all. And I think a reason why he wasn't accountable for anything is because he's still fighting for a job. He wants to go ahead and continue. But yeah, I do think that he said some of the right things. And I think he tried to be as honest as he possibly could be. Look, he's not going to sit there and publicly dump on an interim head coach that was not his selection, that was his boss's pick. You're just not going to do that. You're not going to come out and say, yeah, he was a failure and the guy that picked him was wrong. I don't know what fans want. So I know there was a lot of negative reaction to or there was like reading of tea leaves, if you will, when it came to what Ballard said and what was left unsaid about Saturday, but I didn't expect him to come in and say anything different when it came from that. I think, Zach, you've brought up good points in this process that if the Colts are going to continue with Ballard, you can talk me into that, but Ballard is going to have, if he hasn't had it already, he's going to have to very quickly have the quote unquote come to Jesus moment where he realizes, okay, this process needs tweaking. Maybe it doesn't need wholesale change. Maybe I don't throw out everything that I do when it comes to cap management and how I approach free agency and all of that. But clearly my team building philosophy needs some changes. And if he can proceed that way, he's a smart guy. He's a respected guy still, even with, we're still talking about a guy that has a job and seems to be safe after 6 years and 45 and 52 and one playoff win. How many guys in the NFL would you say that about? Most guys would be out of a job by now. So I think that speaks to the faith that Irsay still has in Chris Ballard. So, I know I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth here because I like you, kind of wanted them to make a change and just rip the Band-Aid off and do a little soft reset here. But now that we know that they're proceeding this way, you can talk me into this working as long as Ballard looks at himself in the mirror and understands that there are some significant changes that are going to need to be made in his thinking.
Yeah, and Chris Ballard did address that in the press conference. He did say something along the lines of, he can get stubborn in his way of thinking and he can get stuck in the mud with what he typically does. And that has hurt in other positions. One thing that he did address was the Colts offensive line. The two guys that he thought could just step in and kind of be starter level players, Matt Pryor and Danny Pinter, he didn't think they would be as poor as they were, because they had those other three players around him. And he owned up to that. He said that he calculated and that was on him. So he did acknowledge some mistakes, some misses, some things he could have done. And he did say he needs to take a hard look at his process. Now, we haven't seen too much of a process change from day one to now. Chris Ballard has kind of been the same guy from that first day. Recently, he has started to draft a couple more premium positions with those higher picks. But for the most part, he has been Chris Ballard. He's going to sit out most of free agency. He's going to just take best player available in the draft. He's not going to get too aggressive with quarterback. Yes, some of that has to change because the Colts just don't have the talent or the roster anymore to where you can survive passing up on certain things. So, yeah, I do think he needs a little bit of change of his philosophy, but I do think his process is fine. Again, process, not giving out the biggest contracts in free agency. That's good process. Not overpaying and having bad contracts. That's a good process. Not trading up just to trade up and get, a Mitch Trubisky type quarterback. That's a good process, but you still have to be aggressive within that process. And I do think he's going to change. Everything that he said today seemed like every indication that he was going to at least change a little bit going forward.
Yeah, I guess my argument would be that you can't just sit around and wait for the perfect situation and Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning to fall into your lap.
Right.
I mean, I think Colts fans you talk to them every day, they're falling into that trap. Well, I don't like anybody in this draft class because this guy does this poorly. And this guy, look, guys, there is no perfect draft prospect. There just isn't. Even Trevor Lawrence, which probably recently is the closest thing that we've had that. I mean, you saw the struggles that he went through up until really the final 6-8 weeks of this year, where it appeared that the light bulb started to go on with him. So I think Ballard, maybe if he could do it all over again, the offseason that I still point to as kind of the turning point for this whole thing was after they squeezed that one good year out of Phillip Rivers.
Yep.
And they either, depending on who you listen to, they either decided they were moving on, or he did, who knows what ended up happening. Regardless, Rivers ended up moving on. And I think that was the time to say, okay, time to go for it here. Yep. And they chose to go another way and get cute with it and find, I think, another stopgap who I think they hoped was going to have a long-term future in Wentz. Of course, that didn't end up happening. And, I think that was the time to kind of be aggressive and put themselves out there. That's not just a hindsight is 2020 thing. I think a lot of people at the time felt that way too. He knows now that he has no choice. They're taking a quarterback, and this is when the proverbial clock, I guess, starts for Ballard. What I think is interesting about this whole situation, Zach, is that let's say the Colts draft a rookie. He ends up starting most of the season, if not all 17 games, and the Colts go 5-12 next year. Ballard's back, right? Because if you're committing to him right now to pick your quarterback and pick your head coach, then you're not going to gas him out after 1 year and then bring in another general manager who doesn't have his quarterback and doesn't have his coach. Am I right?
Yeah, Derek. And honestly, I think we're getting a little too ahead of ourselves with the Chris Ballard
sorry.
conversation. We will definitely
start talking. Yeah.
No. 100%. If this were a show that were not constrained to 30 minutes, we would 100% go into this right now. But we have some more press conferences to talk about. But make sure, guys, you are keeping turning into the Locked On Colts and to the Queer and Schultz show, because Derek is going to go in more detail in the future for sure. But first, dealing with the Colts this year has been painful, arguably more painful than doing your taxes. Just kidding. But still, it's been pretty painful. Don't worry about that, though, because TurboTax has got you covered. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do so. Just not do your taxes. Me as a contractor the last couple of years, TurboTax has been a lifesaver for me. So make sure you guys are going to TurboTax and you just don't do your taxes. You have somebody else doing that for you. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. TurboTax.com. Full service products only. Video meeting with an expert does taxes required. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. Also, guys, this show is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM, the mobile game, Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming the NFL GM and managing your football franchise? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. I like to make fun of Jake. He got on there. So he was just an absolute mess. I have not been fired yet, but give me a couple more seasons. Maybe I'll be Chris Ballard and I'll just survive forever and forever. But Locked On Colts listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure that you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, Derek. So we're going to go from the consummate professional, the all shucks media guy in Chris Ballard, to talking about the interim head coach, Jeff Saturday. Now, before we get into saying anything about Jeff Saturday, we can acknowledge that this was an impossible situation.
Yeah.
There was zero chance for success for him. Don't get me wrong. This is a guy who's never coached before outside of a high school team. He's never coached in the NFL at any level close to this ever. He had to step in and be a head coach without Frank Reich, without Marcus Brady, so two big-time play callers. And then he had two two guys who have called plays before, both turned him down. So he had to go to, 30-year-old Parks Frazier to call plays for his offense. This was a really tough situation that he had zero chance of success with. However, the last thing you want to hear from a guy who's interviewing to be your head coach, and for a guy who is going to have to deal with media scrums like this daily if he were a head coach, and a guy who's going to be a leader of men, is to have no accountability whatsoever. We can acknowledge that a lot of this is not him. Yes, a lot of this is not him, but we can't ignore that this team was 3-5-1 when he came in, and they beat 2 playoff teams in the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Kansas City Chiefs. And they did it, of those 5 games, 2 of those losses came with Sam Ehlinger. It's not like they were all Matt Ryan games. Jeff Saturday comes in and he goes 1-7 with a below average team, drives them into the ground, and they're just getting blown out down the stretch. I mean, this team got worse and worse every single week. And that it was just capped off by that Hail Mary loss or whatever in week 18. But yes, Jeff Saturday, you have a lot of excuses, but take some accountability. Even if you're lying to the media, you have to take some accountability and be that bullet shield that Chris Ballard was.
Yeah, the most disingenuous thing a leader or a boss can do is demand accountability from everybody around him and not be accountable for himself.
Right.
I think we'd all agree, Jeff Saturday, again, we're talking about guys that are easy to like. He's real easy to like, right? Smart guy, good guy, great family, nice blue eyes. Jeff Saturday's got a lot going for him. He's a handsome dude. He was a great player. I'm just disappointed, Zach. I'm disappointed that this is the way this thing has gone, because it goes opposite with that surreal press conference from back in early November where Irsay was basically pounding the table with his fist, talking about how this was going to work and change things. And Saturday was saying, look, if it's not for me, then I'm going to walk out the door. And then they come back 8 weeks later and they're singing a completely different tune. So it's frustrating. It's frustrating that this is the way that it's worked out. I don't think anybody was asking Jeff Saturday to come in and lead the Colts to a wild card berth. I don't think anybody was asking him to come in and lead them to 7 wins, honestly.
Well, one person was.
Well, yeah, sure. And we're going to talk about that person, I know. I don't think the fans or media realistically expected that. What I didn't expect was that things would get, a bad situation would get considerably worse.
Right.
And that's what happened. Yes, they won in Vegas. They competed against Philadelphia. And that was the second game. And you thought, okay, maybe things are turning around here slightly, but then really kind of the bottom fell out after that. It's difficult in the NFL to lose by 17, 20, 24, 30 points consistently. And the Giants game for me, I mean, you could point to the Chargers game too, because the Chargers were like, we don't even have to try here. We've got 6 points. We're good. We're going to win this game already. But the Giants game was one that really jumped out to me as people want to talk about the Vikings game and the Cowboys game. The Giants are a real meh team. And the Giants just did whatever the hell they wanted in that game. And that was the one that really kind of jumped out to me. So I'm disappointed. I'm not particularly surprised that he didn't fall on the sword, but I am disappointed that he couldn't hold himself a little bit more accountable.
Right. And I think, we got to separate the quote unquote head coach or whatever we're going to call him, interim head coach, from the player, from the person, because I still like Jeff Saturday. I cannot dislike Jeff Saturday. I really do think he was just in over his head with this. Like Derek, he was not ready for this. And it's unfortunate that we're still kind of continuing this charade at this point. Like, sure, what is he supposed to say? He wants the job and stuff like that, but why do we even have to pretend like he did anything positive? Like maybe behind closed doors, he brought some accountability and he yelled at the offensive line and everyone liked it. But they were an embarrassing team for the last month and a half. Again, they had more losses by 3 or more scores in a month than the Texans had all season. It's bad. It was that bad.
And you point to things like the clock management at the end of the Steelers game.
Right.
A 10-year-old playing Madden knows to call timeout in that situation. I mean, the fact that he was booed into going for it on Sunday, come on, man. I think there are some things that you can excuse and there are some things that you just can't excuse. So I would love for Jeff Saturday to have a role with this organization, a position coach, an ambassador for the franchise, somebody involved in the front. Great. Wonderful. He's a great representation of the Indianapolis Colts when this was a winning, competent, great place to be. But I just don't think that role for him moving forward is as head coach.
Yeah, well said. I really would love him back as O-line coach. Whoever it gets this head coaching job, I would love him back as the offensive line coach. But I think there is a real concern that he might be the head coach next season with the guy who might be calling the shots over Chris Ballard. But again, that's a conversation for another day. Overall, though, Jeff Saturday's press conference left a lot to be desired for me. And if I even had an ounce of it in my body that I wanted Jeff Saturday to be the head coach next season, that press conference kind of took it all out. Like, I was 100% done with the Jeff Saturday era as head coach in Indy. And I'm sure you felt the same way, Derek.
Yeah, I just don't like the insinuation that being an interim coach automatically means that things can't improve, because we just saw it improve. We saw it this year in Carolina and we saw it last year in Vegas.
Right.
So yeah, actually it can improve. You can make a bad situation slightly better. And Saturday fell well short of that bar.
Yeah. I put it out there on Twitter last week, but of all the interim head coaches since 2010 to coach 8 or more games with the interim tag, Jeff Saturday is the only one who had the team get worse under him. The only one. Given is the only one to come from ESPN to coach the team. So
Yeah.
maybe it's just the ESPN curse or something, but that's just what happened with him as interim coach. It's not a good resume builder. It's not a good thing to build on and say, you know what, this could be our head coach next season. So I think we've said enough on Jeff Saturday. Coming up, we're going to talk about guys who are qualified to be head coaches and who the Colts are seeking out as potential guys to hire for the next head coach. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. It's one of the most fun ways to play daily fantasy. Either on their mobile app or online, just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their stat projection, then you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch, including NFL, NBA, MLB, esports, NASCAR, and even more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. Withdrawals are safe and fast as well, and Prize Picks is now operational in over 30 states and in Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for instant deposit match up to $100. All right, Derek. So we got 4 head coaching candidates to talk about. I think they just I have to pull off. I have to get away from the script here if I were to look at it. I think I just saw George Bremer tweeting about how they have another one lined up. Are you on? Can you get on Twitter there, Derek? Do they have somebody else lined up?
Sure. Let me look here.
Okay. I'll stall the crowd here while you're looking up. But the 4 guys that I am looking at that the Colts have requested interviews with is Shane Steichen, offensive coordinator from the Philadelphia Eagles, Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator with the Los Angeles Rams, Ben Johnson, offensive coordinator with the Detroit Lions, and Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator with the Detroit Lions. So all pretty good candidates who have been around the league for a long time. Were you able to pull up who the other guy is?
The Broncos defensive coordinator. Ejiro.
Yes, Ejiro Evero. That's another great candidate there. So we can talk a little bit about him as well. But of those 5 guys there, Derek, which of those guys kind of intrigues you the most?
Well, I think the most intriguing one usually is going to be kind of the young hotshot breakout guy. And I think that's Ben Johnson, right?
Yeah.
He's younger than me. Only 1 year as an offensive coordinator, but you saw what Detroit did this year and particularly what Jared Goff did this year. And I think that has Johnson's fingerprints all over it. So, those guys are generally the riskiest guys too, the wonderkins, if you will. I mean, every once in a while you have a McVay sort of situation, but I would love to see the Colts just really put themselves out there, not only with the quarterback, but also with this hire. Part of me is also feeling like anybody but Jeff Saturday. So
yes.
I feel like that poisons the well a little bit when it comes to the other head coaching candidates. But, to me, Zach, I fall into 2 camps. One, take a chance on a young guy who can come in here and really kind of change how they've been doing things. 2, err on the side of stability. It's been a very unstable place lately with this franchise. Get somebody that's not learning on the job, that knows what they're doing. And that's where I kind of look at Raheem Morris or somebody like that. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's very experienced. He's been a head coach before. Maybe you can kind of talk me to going down that road.
Yeah, for sure. And to just add more credence to Shane Steichen and Ben Johnson, like those are 2 up and comers, both coaching top 5 offenses this year in the NFL. Steichen over in Philly, Ben Johnson with the Lions. That's kind of the archetype that's been hitting a lot with these new head coaching hires. I mean, you said Sean McVay, that's obviously the big one, but Kyle Shanahan was the same way back in the day. And if you want to go more recent, Mike LaFleur in Green Bay has constantly got the Packers into the playoffs. Not this year, but every other year. Kevin O'Connell with the Vikings, another offense coordinator, young offense coordinator that becomes the head coach. Zach Taylor with the Bengals went to the Super Bowl last year. It is kind of the archetype that is hitting here recently in the NFL. So I'd love to go that way, but honestly, outside of Ben Johnson and Shane Steichen, because I do think those are 1A and 1B right there. Raheem Morris, man, I do like Raheem Morris a lot. And just to kind of keep going back in circles with our interim head coach thing here, he took over for an 0-5 Falcons team a couple of years ago when Dan Quinn was fired. Yeah. And he led them to 4 wins down the stretch, which is not anything like special or amazing. But that team was playing really hard and really strong football. And he didn't get that job. He goes out to the Rams, becomes their defensive coordinator, and he is told to kind of he's basically told to take over Brandon Staley's scheme. Like, he is told he can't do his scheme there. Like, that is one of the craziest things. I mean, he replaced Brandon Staley, and they said, oh yeah, keep doing what Brandon Staley was doing. Don't do your cover 2 stuff. And he goes there, he keeps what they're doing, and they win the Super Bowl. Like, Raheem Morris, I think, is a really strong candidate. Yes, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers thing happened, but that was a long time ago. And he went from a secondary coach up to head coach back then. It was a really weird hiring process. Now he's a guy who's been a defense coordinator for years. He's been with Sean McVay. He's been with other really successful coaches. I think Raheem Morris deserves another shot. So I know there is talk that if Sean McVay steps away, he could get the head coaching job out there. But yeah, I really, really like Raheem Morris.
I do wonder, do you usually see this with coaching changes that they end up doing like the hard correct, where the personality of the previous coach, you jerk the wheel and it goes the complete opposite way? So I don't know all of these guys inside and out personality wise. Are they rah-rah guys? Are they old school football guys? Rah, analytics suck. We heard kind of Irsay sort of allude to that, and they'll go through the interview process, but I wonder if some people that check certain boxes personality wise might have a leg up because Irsay wants to move away from the all is well kind of calm demeanor of the Reich era.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when you're looking at some of these guys that they're requesting interviews with, especially with Steichen, Ben Johnson, even Ejiro Evero, who they're here, I think that's very much those look like very Chris Ballard candidates.
Yeah.
Where analytics are going to be important, and someone who's just mastering their scheme and mastering their craft and stuff like that. Evero is the top of the new age of defensive football, that Vic Fangio style. He's basically taken that and improved it in Denver. Ben Johnson runs this very complex rushing attack with a vertical passing game. It's beautiful. Shane Steichen using a mobile quarterback to kind of kill defenses and spread them out. These are very analytically driven coaches who are also in the forefront of the new age of football. None of that screams rah-rah, except for Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn's very rah-rah. Aaron Glenn is very Dan Campbell. So maybe if Aaron Glenn gets it, maybe we'll say they went to rah-rah. But I do think, again, this kind of comes back to just kind of a little bit of praise for Chris Ballard, where it seems like he's not course correcting too much, where yes, there is a little bit of a course correction and stuff like that. But for the most part, he's still sticking with analytics are important. Being the forefront of the new trends in the NFL is important. And he's kind of showing that with the guys that he's requesting to interview right now.
Yeah, which is good because, I think most people want Ballard to be involved in this process, not only to guard against Saturday, but to guard against perhaps an overcorrection. Because, look, from 2018 through 2021, I think a lot of that time, Frank Reich did a good job maximizing the hand that he was dealt. And It wasn't until the first 7, 8 games of this year where you're like, oh boy, not even he can fix this, that things kind of really went south. So I don't think the Colts necessarily need wholesale change from the process that Ballard and Reich had. I really don't. I just think that they need some tweaks and have to move forward and change some things. And again, the theme of this whole podcast has been accountability. Be accountable for where things have gone wrong for this team.
Definitely. So yeah, I'm really intrigued by those guys there. And who knows, by the time this podcast releases tomorrow morning, we might have 10 more candidates that we didn't cover. But of those guys there, yes, Steichen and Ben Johnson, my top 2 for sure. Raheem Morris, I like. Aaron Glenn, I could be talked into it because he's not Jeff Saturday. And then Ejiro Evero as well. I'm very, very big fan of that. I'm going to definitely look more into that one there. But yeah, Derek, I think that's all we have for today. Again, unfortunately, I had to constrain you to a 30-minute episode here. I know you wanted to keep going and going and going.
Sorry.
But I do I know. I appreciate you jumping on, man, and talking about these pressers. Make sure you guys are following Derek at Schultz975 on Twitter. Also at Locked On Colts on Twitter, at Jake Arthur NFL on Twitter, at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. And also subscribe to wherever you listen to Locked On Colts and also the Query and Schultz Show. Make sure you guys are making those your first couple listens of the day. And thank you for making us right now your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the local insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you guys tomorrow.